The Snapshots Music and Arts Foundation presents a conversation with Sir John Tusa on the state of support for the arts and contrast between the British and American models of art support. Part 1.
How has society's attitude towards the arts changed, comparing where we are today to where we were, say, in the 1950s and 60s?
You would think that, although of course the knee-jerk reaction will be to say, why fund the arts? The fact of the matter is that the arts are far more generally funded, certainly in the United Kingdom and Europe, and supported in the United States through your rather different model, I think on a much broader basis. And the number of people who visit museums, galleries, attend theatres, concerts, etc., is very, very much bigger than it was 50, 60 years ago. That, incidentally, is the timetable that we need to look at, because 60 years ago we'd only just created the Arts Council, which is the national funding body for public money for the arts. And the difference between the sums of money that were available and the number of organizations that were suitable for funding then and now is absolutely enormous. You know, something like 40 million people a year go to museums in Britain. I'm sure the number is equivalently, proportionately higher in the United States. So, although politicians also tend to say, my constituents don't understand why we're spending our money on the arts when we could spend it on hospitals, I think that is rather going through the motions. And people know that if they did not have a gallery, a museum, a concert hall, a theatre, or whatever it might be, in their major cities, and in many minor ones too, they would be very impoverished socially. So the debate about funding the arts will never go away, but I think many, many, many more people understand why the arts are funded and why they are worth funding than they were 60 years ago.
Norman Liebrich, the author, wrote about in his book "And Who Killed Classical Music" about the tremendous cost difference. Whereas one could go to concerts for far less, to see opera, the theater in the past, and costs have gone up, up, and up. Do you see this as a liability to in the big picture, to the mission of the arts to reach the public?
I think it can be, but I think there's a huge range of prices. And if you take something like the major opera houses in London, and I don't know what the situation would be with the Met in New York, but the opera houses in London are very open about charging the top price they can for the stalls and the circles, and then much, much cheaper prices, and sometimes half the seats are at those cheaper prices, in the upper reaches and in the amphitheatre, where incidentally the sound and the sight lines are very, very good. So I think everybody has got very much cleverer at pricing. And people can always say, look, why should you have to pay £250 to hear, or let's say $350 to hear Angela Giorgio at the Royal Opera? And the answer is because the people who pay that can afford it, but you don't have to, and you can pay very, very much less. And so long as the number of seats that are affordable is a reasonable amount, maybe 50% or more of the house, then I think that is acceptable. And everybody, theatres as well, are very much better at pricing things. And you see, in any case, if you go to a rock concert, or if you go to a really big venue with an international superstar, a musical superstar, you will be paying probably more than quite a lot of opera lovers are paying. If you take a season ticket to our National Sport Association football, it will set you back hundreds of pounds. And I think people are aware But it isn't just the arts that can be expensive. Almost all the activities which offer you international quality, they're almost as expensive as the arts. So I don't regard that as a major issue, actually. And of course, our museums and galleries are, thank the Lord, free.
How did organizations in the past, whether they're particularly performing arts nonprofit groups, measure their own success and ability to have an impact versus today?
I think probably 30 to 40 years ago, so long as you sold enough seats, and people were probably pretty vague about what enough seats meant, and so long as you weren't running deficits every year, and so long as the critical and audience reaction was supportive, was favorable, that was probably the long and the short of measuring impact. We have come an enormous way, I'm sure the whole arts world has, and undoubtedly in the United States as well, in, first of all, being aware of audience reach and being far more business-like in the way that we run our organizations. It's only between 15 and 20 years ago that when it was first suggested that arts organizations really needed to be very practical and businesslike about the way they ran their money, there were a lot of people in the arts world who said, but we're not businesses, to which the answer, and it's certainly an answer I always gave because that was what I believed, I said, yes, we're not businesses, but we have to be business-like, and being business-like is actually a condition of continuing to receive funding. Public funding from the state, from the government, and private funding as well, because private funders weren't going to throw money away. So certainly in the last 15 to 20 years, everybody's much more professional. The whole business of running museums, galleries, venues of all kinds is incredibly more professional. We're much more aware of the need to price properly. Just being cheap isn't the only thing that you need to be. We're very much better at all corporate giving. We're very much better at additional commercial income. And we're very much more aware of the relationship with the audience. You may notice I steer away slightly from the word impact because I'm not sure. I think you can get on a very, very slippery ground with impact. The arts have to be excellent. That doesn't mean say that you can say, look, they have made people better or society better or an environment better. They may do that, but it's not a guaranteed impact, and I don't think it's something that should be built in as a hard part of how you judge what the arts do.
What opportunities to invest in bringing performing arts programs into our public education system were missed in the past? Because that seems to be the one area that many professional organizations are spending time on to make up for.
Yes, I think that while it is very good for arts organizations of all kinds to have what we call education and outreach programs and going into schools and doing some really wonderful work, the truth of the matter is that it doesn't in any way act as a substitute or a replacement for having a proper place for the arts and arts education in the normal educational curriculum. There's a question of volume. How many children there are in the education system, how many of those can be touched at any one time by either outreach from a gallery or from a concert hall or a theatre. It's very appreciated, and schools which have these outreach programs like them and speak very highly of the effect that they have, the beneficial effect they have atmosphere in the school and on the learning of pupils. But there must be, in the nature of things, very many more children who never had access to that, because the only way you will teach the arts in schools is if the arts are in various ways part of what we call the core curriculum. And ever since Mrs. Thatcher, when she was Prime Minister, she destroyed a wonderful system that had existed in the United Kingdom for many years, which were called peripatetic music teachers. A very simple idea that they went around groups of schools and they taught whatever they taught, the violin or the oboe or the trumpet, and they'd go from school to school. An enormous number of children learned their instruments through this system. Mrs. Thatcher ended the funding for it, severely reduced it, and ever since people have been trying to put it together again. But however hard you try in specific ways, it will always, I'm afraid, be less effective than in the old days when it was a universally available system with universally available musical instruments to play on. Things like that really do benefit from, indeed, depend on universal provision, almost certainly from the state.
This leads directly into the connected question, which would be, what was the idea or the source behind cutting public arts funding, which you just touched upon?
I think it was, at the time, it was pretty generally part of Conservative government philosophy. Schools were for education. Education was comparatively narrowly defined, and if they erred in any direction, it would be towards the harder disciplines, like science, mathematics, things like that. And at that time, probably still today in the Conservative Party, many people would regard the arts as a marginal benefit to society. So it's always been lurking there, a general undervaluing of the place of arts in society. It's been there for a very, very long time, and it erupts from time to time, and then it has to be fought back. And I think one of the encouraging things is the arts world as a whole is now very much better at organizing itself and at least speaking up and fighting back. One thing that the arts in Britain learned over the last 10 years was that if you didn't speak up for the arts, if we didn't speak up for the arts, nobody else was going to. And that you just had to address all those charges about the marginality of the arts or their irrelevance or their utility, whatever it might be, and you just had to say, no, that's not true, and this is why it isn't true. And I think that the arts have got much better at speaking up. Not that that prevented the current quite severe round of cuts from taking place, but those cuts took place not because the arts didn't speak up for them. It was just that the economic environment was so severe that it was particularly hard, and the politicians didn't make the case. It was hard to make the case for making the arts a special case. I'm afraid doubt about the value of the arts it's a condition of life, but I do think the arts are much better at speaking up now.
Is there a downside in what seems to be a popular trend of in the corporate sector and in the private sector of only supporting children's programs for the performing arts?
Yes, I think there is. I think it's potentially a very dangerous trend, and I'll say why. After all, who can possibly be against concerts for children? Nobody. Who can be against concerts for children from disadvantaged backgrounds? Nobody. But that's not the point. The point is that if funders start tying funds to objects which are too specific, then that is a very narrow, that's a very slippery ground for the basis on which people ideally should support the arts. It's tying the hands of the arts organizations, because the arts organizations almost certainly, they have a better view of what the full range of their audience is, of where the areas of need lie, and they should be allowed to make their judgments about which particular groups have special needs and therefore should have special concerts, just as they are expected to make decisions about programming as a whole. Tied programming, dedicated, hypothecated funding of this kind, while it looks wonderful when it's attached to children of any kind, the principle is a dangerous one, and I would say it's almost always the case that the arts organizations, because they're professional and know their audience, are better determiners of where the money should go, where the effort should go, than even the best intentioned of corporate donors. But you can see it gives a terrific warm glow, doesn't it? We help disadvantaged children. But to push it to its most extreme, if most funding ended up being dedicated to good causes, then there would not be enough funding for the basic core activity without which the specialist program could take place. So I would issue a very considerable red light warning against thinking that really solves any problems. I don't think it does. I think it only creates them.
There are the wealthiest supporting impoverished children, and that's a great thing, but it seems that it's in many ways a PR trend.
I would say that is the danger. That is undoubtedly the danger. And even when it isn't primarily seen as of PR benefit to the donor, the reservations that I've entered also apply. But if, for example, it were driven by the PR needs, either of an individual or a corporation, then I think this is rather unattractive. I think it is very unattractive and likely to be counterproductive as well. After all, in an ideal world, which we don't live in, if you give something, you should give it because you believe in it, and not because you then stand up and say, look at me, I'm really wonderful. Look at the money that I have generously given. Sadly, I know the world isn't like that, but if it gets too far to in the other direction, where you only give because there's a massive PR benefit, then I think that is a very, I've used the word deliberately, corrupted world.
Continue to Part 2.